A major shift is coming in 2025, and if you live in one of these 7 countries, you need to pay attention now. Imagine waking up one day and finding that your money is worthless, your government has collapsed, or your city is overrun with chaos. It might sound extreme, but for millions of people, this nightmare is becoming a harsh reality. From runaway inflation and political turmoil to mass protests and resource shortages, these nations are on the brink of collapse, and 2025 could be the year everything falls apart. So which countries are standing on the edge of disaster? Let's dive in, because if you're in one of these places, you need to brace for impact. Before we begin, if you're new here, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. I am prepared for any change. Let's dive in. 1. Argentina, a nation on the brink of economic ruin. Argentina is spiraling toward an economic and social collapse, and 2025 could be the breaking point. The nation has been battling an unrelenting inflation crisis, with prices soaring out of control and the national currency, the Argentine peso, losing value at an alarming rate. In 2023, inflation surpassed 200%, making it one of the highest in the world, and there are no signs of it slowing down. Basic necessities such as food, medicine, and fuel have become nearly impossible for many citizens to afford. The working class is being crushed under the weight of rising costs, and even those with stable incomes are watching their savings disappear overnight. As a result, many Argentinians are desperately trying to exchange their pesos for US dollars to protect their wealth, but strict government regulations have made that nearly impossible. Without immediate intervention, Argentina could soon face a hyperinflation crisis similar to what Venezuela experienced in the past decade. Adding to the crisis is the country's massive debt burden, which has left Argentina in a state of perpetual financial turmoil. The government owes billions of dollars to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and other foreign lenders, and repeated bailouts have only delayed the inevitable collapse. Every new loan comes with stricter repayment conditions, forcing the government to implement harsh austerity measures, cutting social programs, freezing wages, and increasing taxes on struggling citizens. These policies have fueled mass protests and nationwide strikes as millions take to the streets, demanding economic relief and political change. The situation has become so dire that many experts predict Argentina may default on its debt again, which would trigger a financial disaster, plummeting the country into even deeper recession, forcing banks to collapse, and leaving the government with no resources to keep the economy running. If this happens, Argentina could become a failed state where poverty, crime, and desperation rule daily life. But the economic disaster is only one piece of the puzzle. Argentina's political system is in complete disarray, making recovery nearly impossible. Corruption runs deep in the government, and political leaders are locked in bitter battles over economic policies, leaving the country without clear leadership. Many citizens have lost faith in the system altogether, believing that no politician can fix the crisis. Meanwhile, extreme political polarization has pushed the country toward chaos, with violent clashes between protesters, police, and rival political groups becoming more frequent. The military has remained largely on the sidelines, but if the situation continues to spiral out of control, some fear that Argentina could face a coup or even a civil uprising. With a government paralyzed by infighting and a population growing increasingly desperate, the nation is running out of time to fix its deep-rooted problems before they explode into a full-blown catastrophe. For the people of Argentina, daily life has turned into a fight for survival. The once thriving middle class is disappearing, businesses are shutting down, and professionals, students, and workers are fleeing the country in record numbers in search of a better future abroad. The fear of a total economic and political breakdown is real, and without drastic changes, 2025 could mark the moment when Argentina's fragile system finally collapses. Will Argentina be able to pull itself back from the edge, or is the worst still ahead? The next few months will be crucial in determining whether this once prosperous nation has any chance of survival. 2. Lebanon, a nation. Drowning in crisis, Lebanon is standing on the edge of total collapse, with its economy in freefall, its government in deadlock, and its people growing more desperate by the day. Once considered the Switzerland of the Middle East, due to its financial sector and thriving tourism industry, Lebanon has now become a symbol of economic disaster. The country's currency, the Lebanese pound, has lost over 98% of its value since the financial meltdown began in 2019, making even the most basic necessities, food, fuel, and medicine, unaffordable for millions of people. Banks have collapsed, and citizens have had their life savings wiped out overnight, leading to an increase in violent bank holdups by desperate depositors demanding their own money. Inflation continues to surge, wages are nearly worthless, and the once thriving middle class has all but disappeared. The World Bank has called Lebanon's economic crisis one of the worst in modern history, and without drastic intervention, the situation is set to deteriorate even further in 2025. But Lebanon's crisis is not just financial, its government is in absolute chaos. Corruption, sectarianism, and political deadlock have crippled the state's ability to function. The country has been without a fully functioning government for years, as rival political factions, often backed by foreign powers, continue to fight over control. Public services have collapsed, leaving citizens without electricity, clean water, or reliable health care. The justice system is broken, and crime rates are rising as law enforcement struggles to maintain order. Meanwhile, Hezbollah, the powerful armed militant group, has increased its influence, deepening divisions and raising fears of civil conflict. Many Lebanese people feel abandoned by their leaders, who continue to enrich themselves while the rest of the population suffers. With no real reforms in sight, trust in the government has completely collapsed, leading to mass protests, violent clashes, and a growing sense of hopelessness across the country. To make matters worse, Lebanon is facing a worsening humanitarian crisis as millions of people are pushed into poverty. The United Nations estimates that over 80% of the population now lives below the poverty line, with families struggling to afford food and medicine. The situation has been worsened by Lebanon's ongoing refugee crisis, as the country still hosts over 1.5 million Syrian refugees, straining its already crumbling infrastructure. As social tensions rise, sectarian divisions are becoming more dangerous, and many fear that Lebanon could slide into another civil war. In recent months, armed clashes have erupted between different factions, and with no strong central authority to mediate the conflicts, violence could escalate into something far worse in 2025. Lebanon's future looks bleak, and unless drastic action is taken, the country could become a failed state in the next year. The international community has offered financial aid, but most assistance has been blocked due to corruption and political infighting. Many young and educated Lebanese people are fleeing the country, searching for opportunities elsewhere, while those who remain are left to struggle in a nation that no longer functions. Will Lebanon find a way to rise from the ashes, or is the nation doomed to collapse entirely? 2025 could be the year that determines its fate. 3. Pakistan, a nation on the edge of economic and political chaos. Pakistan is heading toward one of the most dangerous periods in its history. With an economic collapse, political instability, and growing social unrest pushing the country to the brink. Once considered an emerging power in South Asia, Pakistan is now struggling under crippling debt, soaring inflation, and a collapsing currency. The Pakistani rupee has plummeted in value, leading to skyrocketing prices for basic goods like food, fuel, and medicine. Inflation has crossed 40%, and millions of people are finding it harder to afford daily necessities. Power outages have become common, industries are shutting down, and the country's foreign exchange reserves are dangerously low, making it nearly impossible to pay for imports. With billions in debt repayments due in 2025, experts warn that Pakistan is on the verge of a full-scale economic meltdown, similar to what Sri Lanka experienced in 2022. Beyond the economic crisis, Pakistan is also facing unprecedented political instability, which is making recovery nearly impossible. Former Prime Minister Imran Khan's arrest and removal from power in 2023 triggered mass protests and violent clashes across the country. His supporters continue to challenge the government, while rival political parties fight for control, creating a state of chaos. The military, which has historically held massive influence, is now at odds with the civilian government, leading to fears of a potential military coup. Corruption runs deep, and trust in the political system is at an all-time low. As a result, there is no clear leadership to guide the country out of crisis, and every attempt at reform is met with resistance from either the military, political elite, or foreign powers with vested interests. The lack of unity and governance has created a powder keg situation that could explode at any moment. Adding to the crisis, Pakistan is facing rising terrorism and internal security threats. The resurgence of the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, TTP, along with increasing attacks from separatist groups in Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, has created an atmosphere of fear and instability. The government's inability to control these threats has weakened its authority, and many Pakistanis feel abandoned in their own country. With the security forces stretched thin and economic hardship fueling further unrest, Pakistan could see a significant rise in violent extremism in 2025. If the state loses control over key regions, the situation could spiral into civil conflict, further destabilizing the nation. Meanwhile, tensions with India remain high, and any border conflict could push Pakistan deeper into crisis, leaving the country isolated on the global stage. For the people of Pakistan, the future looks uncertain and grim. Many are desperately trying to leave the country as job opportunities vanish and living conditions worsen. The international community, including the IMF and China, has provided financial assistance, but these loans only delay the inevitable economic reckoning. Unless Pakistan makes radical changes to its political and economic structure, 2025 could be the year the country collapses under its own weight. The world is watching. Will Pakistan rise from this crisis, or will it fall into complete disarray? The answer may come sooner than we think. 4. Venezuela, a never-ending crisis. Venezuela, once one of the richest countries in Latin America, is now a nation in perpetual collapse, with no end in sight. The country's economic and political downfall began more than a decade ago, yet 2025 could be the year that Venezuela completely unravels. Hyperinflation has destroyed the currency, making even the most basic goods unaffordable for ordinary citizens. The Venezuelan bolivar has become almost worthless, forcing many people to rely on the US dollar or even barter trade just to survive. The country's economy, once fueled by the world's largest proven oil reserves, has been crippled by corruption, mismanagement, and international sanctions. Oil production has collapsed, and the government's attempts to print more money have only made the crisis worse. As a result, nearly 90% of Venezuelans now live in poverty, struggling to afford food, medicine, and basic necessities. With the economy in freefall, experts warn that 2025 could bring even greater suffering if drastic changes are not made. But Venezuela's collapse is not just economic, it's deeply political. The country has been ruled by Nicolás Maduro since 2013, after the death of Hugo Chávez, and his government has clung to power through repression, fraud, and force. Opposition leaders have been jailed, exiled, or silenced, while elections are widely seen as rigged. Protests against the government have been met with brutal crackdowns, as security forces and paramilitary groups violently suppress dissent. Meanwhile, the country's democratic institutions have been dismantled, and the people have no real way to demand change. As more Venezuelans lose faith in the system, civil unrest is expected to rise in 2025, possibly leading to another wave of violent protests, political assassinations, or even a coup attempt. With no functioning democracy and no legal way to remove Maduro's regime, Venezuela is trapped in a cycle of endless suffering and stagnation. The humanitarian crisis in Venezuela is one of the worst in the world. More than 7.7 million Venezuelans, about 25% of the country's population, have fled the country, making it one of the largest mass migrations in modern history. Those who remain are struggling with severe shortages of food, clean water, and health care. Hospitals lack even the most basic supplies, leading to thousands of preventable deaths. Crime has skyrocketed, with kidnappings, gang violence, and armed robberies becoming a daily reality for Venezuelans. Power outages are common, and many regions go weeks without electricity or running water. With the situation worsening every year, it's hard to see how Venezuela will escape this downward spiral. If 2025 brings more economic collapse, political turmoil, and migration, Venezuela may soon cease to function as a nation altogether. The question remains, is there any hope left for Venezuela? The international community has tried to intervene with sanctions and diplomatic pressure, but so far, nothing has worked. Countries like the United States and Colombia continue to push for democratic change, while others, including Russia and China, support Maduro's rule to maintain their influence in the region. As the world watches Venezuela crumble, its people are left with two choices: stay and suffer or flee in search of a better life. Unless drastic reforms happen, 2025 could be the year that Venezuela reaches the point of no return, becoming a completely failed state. Will the people rise up, or will the country continue its slow and painful collapse? Only time will tell. 5. Egypt: debt crisis and resource shortages. Egypt, a nation with one of the world's oldest civilizations, is now standing on the brink of economic catastrophe. Once seen as a regional powerhouse, Egypt is now drowning in a severe debt crisis, making it one of the most fragile economies in the Middle East. The country's foreign debt has ballooned to over $165 billion, and with massive repayments due in 2025, Egypt is staring at a potential financial meltdown. The Egyptian pound has lost over 50% of its value in recent years, causing a dramatic rise in the prices of food, fuel, and other essentials. Inflation has skyrocketed past 35%, pushing millions of Egyptians into poverty. The government, led by President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, has borrowed heavily from international lenders like the IMF and Gulf states, but these loans have only provided temporary relief. If Egypt fails to pay its debts in 2025, a total economic collapse could follow, leading to widespread suffering and civil unrest. Beyond the financial crisis, resource shortages are becoming an existential threat to Egypt's future. The most alarming issue is water scarcity, with the country relying almost entirely on the Nile River for its freshwater supply. However, Ethiopia's controversial Grand Renaissance Dam, GERD, has reduced Egypt's share of the Nile's water, creating tensions between the two nations. As Egypt's population grows past 110 million, demand for water is surging, while supply is shrinking. Farmers are struggling to irrigate their crops, leading to food shortages and rising prices. Climate change is also worsening the situation, with rising temperatures and desertification threatening agricultural production. With less water, less food, and an unstable economy, Egypt could soon face a full-blown humanitarian crisis in 2025, putting millions at risk of hunger and displacement. The political landscape in Egypt is just as fragile as its economy. Since taking power in a military coup in 2013, President el-Sisi has ruled with an iron fist, silencing opposition, jailing political activists, and restricting free speech. While the government presents itself as a stabilizing force, many Egyptians are growing increasingly frustrated with the lack of democracy, corruption, and economic hardship. Protests are rare due to the government's strict crackdown on dissent, but the worsening financial crisis might push millions of desperate Egyptians to take to the streets in 2025. The last time Egypt saw mass protests was during the Arab Spring in 2011, which led to the fall of President Hosni Mubarak. If conditions continue to deteriorate, another wave of uprisings could be inevitable, and this time, the consequences could be even more devastating. 6. Haiti, a nation. Without stability, Haiti, the first independent Black republic in the world, is now on the brink of total collapse. The country has endured decades of political instability, economic ruin, and devastating natural disasters. But 2025 could be the year that Haiti reaches a point of no return. The government is practically non-existent, with no fully functioning institutions to maintain law and order. Since the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse in 2021, Haiti has been thrown into anarchy, with no clear leadership and a power vacuum that has been filled by violent gangs. These gangs control over 80% of the capital, Port-au-Prince, terrorizing the population with kidnappings, murders, and extortion. With no strong government, no functioning police force, and no economic stability, Haiti is descending into a failed state, and 2025 could be the year that it completely unravels. The economic situation in Haiti is disastrous. More than 60% of the population lives in poverty, and the country remains the poorest in the Western Hemisphere. Inflation has made food and basic goods unaffordable for most citizens, leading to a severe hunger crisis. The national currency, the gourd, has collapsed in value, making imports nearly impossible. Since Haiti produces very little domestically, it relies heavily on foreign aid and remittances from Haitians living abroad. However, with increasing global crises, aid has dwindled, and the people are left to fend for themselves. Unemployment is at an all-time high, and those who do have jobs often earn less than $2 per day. With no economic prospects, millions of Haitians are desperate to flee, seeking refuge in countries like the United States, the Dominican Republic, and Brazil. But with immigration policies tightening worldwide, many are left trapped in misery, facing starvation and violence daily. Security in Haiti is practically non-existent. Armed gangs have taken over entire neighborhoods, blocking roads, looting businesses, and even attacking police stations. These criminal groups operate as shadow governments, deciding who lives, who dies, and who can move freely. In many areas, gang leaders have more power than government officials, and people are forced to pay protection money just to survive. The situation is so dire that the United Nations has called for an international intervention, but with global conflicts rising, there is little political will to send troops. Haiti's security crisis is one of the worst in the world, and unless immediate action is taken, 2025 could bring a complete societal breakdown, with gangs effectively replacing the government altogether. 7. Nigeria. Economic collapse and rising insecurity. Nigeria, often called the Giant of Africa, is teetering on the edge of a major collapse. Despite being Africa's largest economy and most populous country, Nigeria is now facing crippling economic turmoil, runaway inflation, and an escalating security crisis that threatens to destabilize the entire region. The country's economy has been built on oil exports, but years of mismanagement, corruption, and declining global oil prices have left millions of Nigerians struggling to survive. In 2025, Nigeria is expected to face one of its worst economic downturns in history, with the naira, the national currency, plummeting to record lows, making food and fuel unaffordable for the majority of its citizens. The government's mounting debt crisis, combined with soaring unemployment rates exceeding 40%, is creating an economic nightmare that could soon spiral out of control. One of Nigeria's biggest problems is hyperinflation, which has made life unbearable for millions. Prices of essential goods like rice, flour, and cooking oil have tripled in just a few years, pushing millions below the poverty line. The cost of fuel has also skyrocketed, with the removal of subsidies leading to transportation and electricity costs becoming unaffordable for many. The middle class is shrinking rapidly, and desperation is driving people to crime, mass migration, or protests against the government. With over 133 million Nigerians already living in multidimensional poverty, the worsening economic conditions are making daily survival a struggle. If these trends continue into 2025, a full-blown economic collapse could trigger widespread civil unrest, political instability, and possibly even state failure. However, economic turmoil is only part of Nigeria's crisis. security concerns are just as alarming. The country is plagued by multiple armed conflicts, including the ongoing Boko Haram insurgency in the northeast, deadly clashes between farmers and herders, and the rise of banditry and kidnappings in many regions. Armed groups now control vast parts of the country, making highways and rural areas incredibly dangerous. Kidnapping for ransom has become one of the fastest-growing criminal enterprises, with families forced to pay huge sums to secure the release of their loved ones. The Nigerian military has struggled to contain the violence, and in many cases, local communities are left to defend themselves. With lawlessness increasing, 2025 could see Nigeria fall deeper into chaos, with some regions completely ungoverned. The world is changing fast, and some countries are on the brink of collapse. Will they find a way to recover? Or will 2025 be the year everything falls apart? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video.